every single thing that has ever happened to you is a thread to understanding yourself better. Everything. Planting wisdom is my project of using the earth and nature and my love of gardening plants as a way of conveying spiritual insight. Morning, everybody. This is Planting Wisdom with Michael. So, there's two things I'd like to talk about today. The first is a couple things around breath work, and then after that, I'd like to talk about planting wisdom and what's this project all about. So, um, to start with breath work, let's take 10 breaths. Um, how we're going to do these breaths is it's going to be a strong inhale through the nose and exhale, and yet not forceful. So you don't want to feel like you're straining, but that there's a certain um, enthusiasm, we'll say, a certain like oomph to it, but not straining, not right. So, and I'm going to use my hand to kind of indicate the position of the breath, and the reason why I like to do that as a visual cue, so that you can remember that you're not holding anywhere. It's like a pendulum, right? So you're not, or vice versa. So it's smooth in and out, um, and you also don't want to accelerate it one way or the other, because you all those kinds of techniques are they're there, but not in this process, not in what I'm recommending, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so let's take 10 breaths. I think I might have snuck in an 11th breath there. I'll have to check the tape. Um, I don't know how that is for you, but I find that quite enjoyable. And then, of course, this resulting kind of calm sets in, which I always appreciate. And of course, that's um, two of the main reasons to do breath work. Feels good and yields positive results in the immediate aftermath. Um, so now, having addressed why you may do a 10 breath exercise, I want to say that I see breath work in two different classes. There's the first class, which is what we've just done, which is kind of like your little bites of it. And these are what I would consider like brushing your teeth every day, or, wake up and drink a glass of water, or stretching, go for a walk. It's that kind of thing. And then you have your more deeper probing, kind of excavating, uh, this kind of like hard, not hard, but intense work that would be more likened to going to the dentist, going to your physician, um, doing your deeper therapies, and it's important to have both. And I think that that's the real point of this, is that it's important to have both practices going on, so that you have your ongoing maintenance, and then also on a regular basis you go in and do a deeper dive with someone who is potentially more experienced than yourself, that can point out things to you that you may not notice, and I think that that has a lot of value. And so when people ask me about breath work, what my partner, my wife, and I, what we do, well, she's both my wife and my partner in breath work, um, and that's actually a whole story. I can go into that later. Um, but what we do is we host these events where we guide people through the more intense, deeper stuff, and it's a really beautiful experience, and I recommend anyone to do that. And we have people that come out to Hawaii for that reason, and it's amazing. And of course, everyone, if you're interested, please reach out through the website. That being said, um, that kind of work is it is intense, and I don't think that it's particularly valuable to do that all the time. To do that, like, let's say, um, once a week, or even for some people once a month is too much. And and if you get in the habit of going too intensely all the time, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, um, you end up making the activity more important than the underlying purpose for which that activity is performed. And you can get kind of caught up in, like, almost getting high from the practice, as opposed to using that medicine as a way of alleviating certain things that have accumulated in your energetic, emotional bodies. And that kind of gets away from the point, right? So the point is to unburden yourself from, we'll say, in a generic sense, energies that are um, uh, interfering with the optimal functioning of your body and your mind and your spirit. Um, but if you just get so attached to that, then that process, then you kind of, you kind of lose the big picture. So that's why I think that doing the more intensive stuff, yes, of course, do it on a longer periodic basis, but then on the short period, on your daily practice, 10 breaths, amazing. Um, and that's the thing also with breath work. We have a tendency, that I've noticed in our culture, that uh, is prone towards complication, and people want, you know like, various bells and whistles on things. And one of the things, as myself being, I'd say I describe myself as fairly stoic, that's very attractive about breath work, is that it's just not like that. It can be, and maybe you can force it to be complicated if you really need that. But breathwork of itself is as simple as it gets. I mean, everything that we just did, those 10 breaths, functionally, on the side of the participant, that's identical to what you do for a 90-minute intensive. I mean, that's really it. Now, of course, there's a lot of other things going on in the background, and there's a lot of internal work going on, but functionally, that's it. We don't have special breathing sounds, or facial shapes, or hand motions. I mean, I just do this as a visual cue to other people. I don't do that for myself, or um, when I'm alone. Although, um, if it helps, by all means. I'm just saying it's not a necessary component. Um, so when people ask me about offering techniques or snippets of breath work as a um, as part of like how I represent this project, um, unfortunately, uh, the thing about breathwork is that it's so simple. The various you know bells and whistles of it are really not important. The critical part of the ongoing practice of breathwork is that you're consistent. That's my commitment to you. We'll start every episode with 10 breaths, and start every day with 10 breaths. And if you feel like you do this 10 breaths, you're like, wow, I feel great. I'd say um, hold off on doing more, like let's say 20, and then instead be mindful to do, if you do 10 in the morning, do 10 in the afternoon. Um, and you may even want to do like 10 in the evening. Just be a little bit mindful because it can be energizing. It can also be calming. So you just got to notice that. You don't want to work yourself up right before you're trying to sleep. So there's that. But the the consistency is so important that if you can do um, 10 breaths every morning for, let's say, a month, that will yield so much more value to your life and your practice and your mental clarity and well-being than any fancy technique has even the possibility of offering. Um, so um, that's what I think is the most important when we look at using the breath to maintain our well-being. Now, um, I will in the future go into how that works and other reasons for why we do this. So I'm sure that that's going to be there's a lot of meat to get into there, and so we will get into that later. Um, but for the time being, let's get into planting wisdom. Yay! Um, you might notice this massive pile of mulch behind me. Um, Besides breath work, I do a lot of gardening. I'm a very big advocate of working with nature. It's been my experience through tons of shamanic practices and meditation styles, techniques, retreats, and all these kinds of things that there's a tendency to kind of float off a little bit, and sometimes a lot, and um, and I that can be helpful to detach to a certain degree in a under supervision. I've seen it happen in a bad way when people do it irresponsibly. Um, but but in the practicalities of life, if you have a spouse, children, job, all these things that are that demand your attention and your availability, that you know being being vigilant about um, your presence is really important. So you can't just kind of like float off, and that's one of the things that about doing working with nature is this really grounding effect that also still yields a lot of really positive results and helps you to stay focused in these what would otherwise be considered like ethereal realms. And this is my experience. I don't think that it's unique to me at all. This is what resonates, and I think it actually resonates with a lot of people once they kind of settle into it. So what I'm specifically talking about is, not just enjoying the beauty of plants. I keep looking over at my cinnamon. So so pretty. Um, the new leaves are red, as you might expect from cinnamon, and that's awesome. Of course, when you eat cinnamon from the store, it's not the leaf; it's the bark. But the leaves have a cinnamon in them as well. Um, I got lost my train of thought there. Um, the thing about working with plants is that you can still observe and extract a lot of insight about life and what all that is, as well as being reminded of how nature works and how we are part of nature and how we interact with things and our place in the universe. And so it's kind of like where the rubber meets the road. You know, you spend too much time in ethereal, conceptual realms, and then you get your hands dirty, and then you come back and really ground everything. And I think that it's a very important aspect of the spiritual journey. Is you know, if you go out and acquire knowledge and then come back and put that knowledge to work and be reminded of your knowledge in your daily practices. So how that relates to mulch, we just recently had a tree that was growing into some power lines, and you know, I love trees, but sometimes they become a nuisance, and so we had to cut it, not completely. I don't want to kill it unless I have to, but um, we had to cut it and then take that material and do something with it. So as I'm watching them cut this tree, I'm like, well, that's not waste. And this is my example for how we use nature to kind of like conceptualize or to congeal um, you know, energetic concepts. Um, there is a tendency in the spiritual community to talk about people being toxic and to cut out the toxic and to like eject toxic and to create these boundaries and unfortunately I think that that is not inherently bad advice. It does set up um, a distance and and in the higher levels of spiritual teaching, and specifically Vipassana comes to mind when I say this, having these aversions um, is actually hurting you, you know. And that's not to say you don't get to have preferences. Of course, you have preferences. Everyone has preferences. But 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 when you reject something like that, um, it kind of creates a weight in you. And so when you're identifying something that doesn't serve you anymore, that doesn't mean that you're just a leaf in the wind. You have your boundaries, but you don't say, "Oh, this is junk," and or "this is toxic," and I'm going to get rid of it. Well, there's a subtle truth that's going on here that can be overlooked, which is every single thing that has ever happened to you is a thread to understanding yourself better. Everything. If it's good, those are the more enjoyable ones. If it's challenging, it's still true. It's just a little bit tougher because whatever that lesson is, it might sting a little, it might hurt. But there's nothing that comes up that you can't look at It's not going to teach you something about yourself. And so what you might consider as this nuisance that becomes a waste product is actually going to be redistributed to the land and feed all the other plants. So that analogy just erupts out of this practice of gardening. So let's look at an example of that. Let's say you had a very difficult relationship with a parent, and someone might tell you, "Oh, your parent is toxic. Don't talk to them anymore." You know, and and to a certain person that might seem reasonable, and honestly, like, there's certain levels of difficulty with people that you may need to just completely separate yourself from a situation if there's physical violence, of course. um, but for the most part, it's the toxicity uh, that people are talking about is on the lines of verbal, and it can be, the mental trauma is serious. I'm not discounting that, but it's not life threatening. And so all the things that are mental we can deal with, in a if we have a calm perspective on it, we can work with it. So that's the whole thing. We look at this relationship and we say, this relationship is not what I want. I'm not going to have an emotional reaction to it as an aversion and create this boundary of in myself. What I am going to do is say, this is not for me. What can I do with it? How can I repurpose what appears to be a nuisance, like a tree growing into electrical wires, and use that for something that's beneficial to me? And what would be beneficial is to say, what are the real mechanics of this relationship? Like how is it that I find myself in this toxic relationship, that it is continuing on? Like, what what am I doing to participate in it? And also, and this can be a real gut punch for people. What am I getting out of it? So a lot of times, people will perpetuate unhealthy relationships because it allows them to continue a narrative that is valuable to them. Um, you know, like, you know, being a victim, or being the savior, or being the wounded healer, or being um, kind. That comes up a lot. Like, I tolerate being injured over and over again by this person because I'm kind. You know, it's like, well, you're not really doing anyone any favors by letting someone hurt you. Um, but that narrative can be enough to allow yourself to perpetuate something that has run its course. Um, so that's the example of using what would be otherwise something that you might think, oh, this is waste. Well, no, it's not waste. This is valuable material to learn about yourself. And um, and then once you figure out how to repurpose that material, this is all going to go back and feed all the things that will bring more joy and beauty to my life. All these wonderful plants that I have. So I wanted to kind of summarize all that, which is that um, planting wisdom is my project of using the earth and nature and my love of gardening plants as a way of making analogies and conveying spiritual insight. And if that resonates, I hope to see you soon. Aloha.
There's one thing I noticed and one thing I wanted to mention after I started shoveling this huge pile of mulch is the first being this pile is probably close to 10 yards worth of material that would be daunting, but we just chip away wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, and over time it will be gone. The other thing I want to mention, if you can see this little bit of smoke, it's really cool. What that is the material is eating itself. It's already through microbiology breaking itself down, and that's something that that's worth mentioning because I do think that you know psychic and emotional, spiritual materials require our participation, and when we stop feeding it, it doesn't just go inert. It will it will over time dissolve itself. And so, some advice from a teacher of mine, Rupert Spira, I think is a very wise person. He says, just the awareness is enough. A lot of times, after you've uncovered something, and I'm paraphrasing, to do anything about it is just the back door of the ego. So, here we have this material removed and has given us insight and is now slowly decomposing itself. It just amazes me how wonderfully elegant the system of nature is.